So when we want to get an idea of what can happen in a strange legal case, we call our friends at Del Rio and Caraway.
Well, Lisa caught up with them. Learn more about another edition of Sidebar.
Time for your sidebar this morning, tackling a couple of stories here. This first one, it is summertime, many people visiting amusement parks. That's the case that happened here in Iowa. 4th of July weekend. It is a water rafting ride. That raft flipped over. An 11-year-old boy was killed, 3 others injured. We are with 2 of our local experts here, Dan Del Rio, Chuck Caraway. Good morning to you. Let's talk a little bit. Are there any consequences in this situation?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a complex situation. You have what could be considered a high-risk activity, being that you're on some sort of a roller coaster ride, something of that nature. Tragic what happens, but then you also have an interesting concept here of this is not a natural activity. This is something that was engineered by someone. So the real risk is high-risk activity, liability, who put it together, whose fault is it? So that's kind of what we're dealing with. Here you have a raft that flips over entirely. 6 people on it, 1 child killed, another in critical condition. In that kind of a situation, what the courts here in California have looked at is, does it qualify for a common carrier? If it's a common carrier, this is where we say it has a heightened duty to all its passengers because it is solely responsible for what happens to those people. Disneyland actually has a couple cases on exactly this issue for, I believe, the Indiana Jones ride and the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. And in those situations, what they found out is if it's completely man-made, completely artificial, they're 100% in control of what happens, when it happens, how it happens. That's a common carrier scenario. So in that scenario, the ride, the amusement park, has ultimate liability and the highest duty to go ahead and protect their passengers.
What about assumption of the risk? Because it's a roller coaster, so I guess you're going to assume that something may happen. Is that something that could occur?
So that's exactly it. Becomes the debate, this kind of tug of war back and forth of, look, there's all these warnings on roller coasters. Don't ride if pregnant. Don't ride if you have known certain conditions. All of those kind of natural things to expect versus at the other side, they have the utmost duty to these people. So that's exactly where this tug of war is. Now, in something as gross as the entire ride flipped, I don't think there's much they could have done.
Okay. All right. Our next story here, this one a little closer to home, out of Shingle Springs. Cal Fire battling a fire with an inmate firefighter crew. While battling that fire, one of those firefighters took a fire truck for a joyride, caused some property damage to some local businesses, ended up crashing that fire truck, and of course, that inmate now back in custody. Who's liable here?
So I think in this case, well, first you have the government because you have the Department of Corrections. And when you have the government is actually immune in a lot of situations. But in this particular situation, I don't think there's going to be immunity there. Department of Corrections is bringing out these trustees. They're inmates that are allowed to come out and they train to fight these fires. But when they do that, they're taking on the liability of watching them and making sure that they don't get into any kind of trouble. The fact that this occurred, it pretty much tells you that they weren't watching them as well as they maybe should have. And so the Department of Correction is likely going to be responsible for all the damage that that inmate caused.
I know one of the business owners said they were literally in 30 seconds and caused quite a bit of damage in those 30 seconds.
Well, a fire truck's going to cause a lot of damage. So luckily nobody was hurt.
That is good news.
It's just property damage, so it's a good thing.
It is a good thing indeed. All right. We appreciate your insight as always, Del Rio and Caraway, for your sidebar this morning.
Thanks, Sue.